In a small town on the edge of America's endless highways, where poverty wrapped around every home like a heavy blanket, lived a dark-skinned woman named Grace Johnson. Life had not been kind to her. Her father had died when she was young, her mother fell ill, and her younger sister needed schooling. With no education, no money, and no real choices, survival became her only goal. Grace made the hard decision to move to the city in search of work. She found a job as a maid for a wealthy family. Their house was massive, their cars shining, their clothes elegant, but their hearts were cold and cruel. The very first day she stepped inside, the lady of the house wrinkled her nose and snapped, "This is the maid? Lord, she's so dark. I hope she doesn't stain the brightness of this home." Grace lowered her eyes, swallowing the insult. It wasn't new. Since childhood, she had endured mocking comments about her skin. But now, her family's survival depended on this job, so she forced herself to remain silent. Her life inside that house was grueling. Before the sun rose, she was ordered to clean. Dishes, laundry, cooking, scrubbing floors, tending to the children. Her hands never rested. And when she faltered, insults rained down like fire. If she dropped a dish, the madam shouted, "Do you know how expensive this is? Are you blind?" If the food had too much or too little salt, she was slapped or had water thrown in her face. Even the children joined in. They mocked her accent, laughed at her skin, and whispered cruel jokes. "Mama, she looks like an animal, doesn't she?" they'd giggle. Grace bore it all. Every insult was like a dagger, but she bit her tongue. Her mother needed medicine, and her sister needed books. She couldn't afford to lose this job. At night, she slept on a thin mat in the corner of the kitchen. She would cry quietly, pressing her face into her pillow so no one would hear. "God, did you make me only to suffer? Will I ever be seen as more than a servant?" But each morning, she rose again. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Her dreams seemed to wither in the shadows of that wealthy home. Yet, buried deep inside, a small spark of hope still glowed. A spark that would one day light the world. Grace's days melted into one another. Work, insults, exhaustion. The house glittered with wealth, yet her life inside it was a cage. The madam delighted in breaking her spirit. If Grace moved too slowly, she was scolded. If she accidentally broke something, she was dragged by the arm and threatened. Even the children's cruelty was endless, hiding her cleaning tools, mocking her bowed head, laughing at her humility. At night, Grace prayed in whispers, "God, give me strength. Let my mother live. Let my sister's dreams not die with poverty. And if nothing else, give me patience." Her prayers were the only comfort she had, her invisible bandages for wounds no one else saw. One night, after being burned by hot soup spilled near her by the madam's rage, Grace sat shaking on the floor. She pressed her hands to her chest and asked herself, "Why me? What crime have I committed to deserve this life?" But every time she thought of quitting, she remembered her family, her mother's cough, her sister's hopeful eyes. So she endured. Her patience wasn't just for herself, it was for them. Over time, her endurance grew into resilience. Each insult became fuel for an inner fire. She didn't know it yet, but her suffering was shaping her into something stronger than she could imagine. One night, she overheard the madam laughing with her guests. "That maid of ours is nothing. People like her are born servants and will die servants." Grace froze. Her heart pounded. For a moment, she stared at her rough, tired hands. "Born a servant? Die a servant?" she whispered. And something inside her shifted. A voice rose within. "No, I will not die like this. One day, I will prove them wrong." From that night on, her prayers changed. She no longer asked only for patience. She asked for a chance, a way to rise. The decision came slowly, like dawn after a long night. Grace realized she couldn't spend her whole life in chains. One morning, standing by the kitchen window as the sun rose, she thought, "What if I left? What if I built something of my own?" It seemed impossible. She had no education, no money, and no connections. But the thought clung to her heart like a seed. Weeks later, after another day of abuse, she quietly packed her small bag, one old dress, a scarf, and the few coins she had saved by skipping meals. Without a word, she left the house behind. Life outside was harsh. She rented a tiny corner in a slum where hunger and filth filled the streets. But she felt free. For the first time in years, she wasn't trapped under the madam's cruelty. With her small savings, she bought vegetables and spices. Using recipes from her mother, she set up a tiny food stall on a busy corner. At first, customers sneered. Some mocked her skin, others laughed at her courage. But compared to her old life, these insults meant nothing. She worked tirelessly, waking before dawn to cook, standing all day through heat and rain, collapsing into sleep at night. Slowly, people began returning. They loved her cooking, but more than that, they felt respected by her. Grace greeted every customer with kindness, something she had never received in her servant days. Her stall grew popular. She expanded, buying a cart, then hiring help. She saved every coin, investing it back into her work. The struggle was still hard. Some nights she cried from exhaustion. But her tears had changed. They weren't of humiliation anymore, but of effort, of progress. One evening, counting her earnings under a street lamp, she smiled. These coins were proof she was no longer a servant. She was building her own future. And she knew, deep in her heart, this was just the beginning. Years passed. Grace's food stall became a small restaurant. Its tables were simple, its walls unpolished, but it carried her heart. She treated her staff with respect, always remembering her own pain. "No one will ever feel here what I once felt," she vowed. Her workers were fed before customers arrived, paid fairly, and spoken to kindly. They repaid her with loyalty and love. Customers noticed. They came not just for food, but for the warmth. Soon, demand grew. Grace opened a second location, then a third. Her name spread. Newspapers wrote about the maid who became a businesswoman. Challenges came. Competitors tried to crush her. Officials demanded bribes. Critics mocked her. But Grace had been forged in suffering. She fought back, learned business strategies, and grew stronger. Her brand became a chain. She employed hundreds, then thousands, many of them women who had once been maids like her. She built schools for children and clinics for the sick, remembering her mother and sister. Her little sister became a doctor, her dream fulfilled. And Grace, once mocked as nothing, was now called a billionaire. Yet she remained humble. She often whispered to herself, "They said I'd die a servant, but I was born human, and humans can rise." What she didn't know was that fate was preparing to close the circle. One day, Grace sat in her high-rise office, reviewing contracts for her expanding empire. Her secretary entered. "Madam, there's a family here. They say they knew you long ago." Grace nodded. "Send them in." The door opened. Her breath caught. Standing before her were the very people who had once enslaved her spirit, the wealthy family she had served. But they were no longer wealthy. Their clothes were plain, their faces weary, their pride gone. The madam, once arrogant, spoke with trembling lips. "Grace, we've lost everything. The business failed, debts drowned us. Please, could you give us jobs?" Memories surged. Insults, laughter, humiliation. Grace could have mocked them. She could have turned them away, but she didn't. She leaned back in her chair, calm and composed. "Do you remember what you once told me? That I was born a servant and would die a servant?" The madam looked down in shame. "You were wrong," Grace continued. "No one is born to be trampled forever. Every human being has dignity. Those who endure suffering often rise higher than anyone expects." The family stood in silence, guilt heavy in the air. Grace's tone softened. "I will give you jobs, not because I owe you, but because I refuse to become what you once were. I will not strip others of dignity." Tears filled the madam's eyes. The children stared at Grace, finally seeing her for what she was, a leader, a woman of power and grace. As they left, Grace turned to the window, looking out at the city that now carried her name. She whispered, "Life humbles the proud and lifts the broken. Never steal another person's dignity. Tomorrow, the one you despise may be the one you need." The servant who once cried in the kitchen corner was now a beacon of hope. Grace Johnson had turned wounds into wisdom, pain into power, and humiliation into humanity. She had not chosen revenge. She had chosen grace.